Good morning, everyone, and thank you for coming out. Everyone having a good time on the ascent? Wow, what a ship. Isn't this something? I heard someone say it was $1.2 billion. Man, that's something. It's just like my boat, except for mine's got oars and it's red. Anyway, we're going to talk about fighters today, and we're going to talk about fighter pilots, and I always love sharing stories with you, and of course my wife has often said more stories, so I promise you lots of those. Throughout the week on the Sea Days, I'm going to get to speak to you on other things like Top Gun on our next Sea Day, whether the movie was realistic or not. I'm going to take questions at the end of all the presentations to make sure that you have a chance to ask me something, but then I'll always wrap it up with a funny story or maybe just a recap. So this is how we're going to move along. But in order for us to do that, I need you to use your imagination. Is that okay? Can you come with me on an adventure? Because I don't want to just bring you into the airplane. I want you right in the cockpit. So we're going to take you backstage, just like those backstage passes, but this time we're going to go backstage behind the scenes, not through the front gate of an Air Force base, but actually through the back gate, somewhere so you can learn a little bit more about the airplane. And so what we're going to do here, it is kind of top secret, so I want you to kind of keep all this down on yourselves in this theater for now. But what we're going to do is we're going to get you a better understanding of this aircraft and what it's like to fly the F-18. I'm very fortunate. I have 15,000 hours on flying airplanes, from fighters to airliners. I was in the airline industry. I was also flying business jets, and I even built my own little airplane. But for today, we're talking about training young fighter pilots, and I want you to come along with me. How do we use your imagination? Well, right now you're sitting in a chair. It's pretty comfortable. It's a theater chair. I'm imagining that it probably costs between $300 and $400 a chair. It's comfortable. Feel it. Feel the armrest. Pretty comfortable. Well, I want to put you in a much better chair. I want to give you a chair that costs $2 million. It's not very comfortable. In fact, it's really uncomfortable, but it's only designed one thing, and it's to save your life. And there it is. It's an ejection seat. Now, these ejection seats are rocket powered, but they got to go up much faster than a rocket. You know, when a rocket first launches, it goes slowly. These things have to start with a bang. So what they do is they put a hand grenade underneath it. Not a real hand grenade, but the explosive charge of that, and it explodes before the rocket can go. And then finally the rocket motor will go up, and out you go for a nice ride. Well, I don't want you to have to do that today, but I do want you to strap in to the aircraft. This is a picture of my wife when we were first married. And she's in the cockpit of an old fighter plane. Actually, it was a trainer, a T-33. And I wanted to show you this image so that you can get an idea of what it would be like to strap in. It's a little bit claustrophobic. Now, you can see the green straps. Those are her parachute straps. The white straps down the center, that's her shoulder harness. It connects to her lap belt and a center strap. That's a 5-point harness. And when she ejects from the aircraft, that harness has to break apart so that she can get free from the ejection seat and her parachute can open. Notice her helmet weighs about 5 pounds. That becomes pretty important when you're pulling a lot of G and you're turning your head about. But most importantly, I want you to notice the mask. When she put it on, she got to hear her own voice. She thought that was kind of fun, but then she could hear herself breathing. And it smelled like old rubber. It wasn't very pleasant. But if you put on 100% oxygen, you got pressure, and it was like a breath of fresh air, pepperminty smell. So you felt pretty good about that. You had to crank it up really tight. Why? Because when you're pulling G-forces, the thing could sag down off her nose, and she wouldn't be able to speak anymore. She wouldn't be able to breathe. So we cranked up that mask really tight. What is G-force? Well, it's a centrifugal force. All airplanes that are in the sky that turn have to bank to turn. In other words, they have to go on their side like this. So that what happens is as the aircraft is going around a corner, unlike a car that you'd slide sideways, all the weight comes down into the bottom of your seat. That's called G-force. If I had a bucket full of rocks on a rope and I started swinging it around the stage like this, as I swung it faster and faster, that rocks would feel heavier and heavier. That's centrifugal force. So out the bottom of the aircraft, the pilot's being forced down towards the belly of the aircraft. So she has to tense up her tummy muscles and hold tight to try and keep the blood from coming out of her head. And that way she can keep her vision and she won't lose her consciousness. So that's how that mask feels when you're wearing that really tight. Okay, so maybe to give you a better idea of what it's like to train a young fighter pilot, I have a little quick video here. And one of the things a lot of people ask me is if I've ever had a close call, and I'm going to share that with you in a few minutes. In fact, I had a friend of mine once, he said, he was a fellow instructor, and he said, you know, Dale, he says, I think these students are far more concerned about failing a trip than they are about running into one another. And I thought, nah, he's kidding, right? Well, let's listen to this video, and maybe you'll learn a little bit more.
Teams is to defend against air-to-air targets. This is what's known as dogfighting, and it's an arena in which the FA-18 has proven highly successful. Close combat is a modern duel to the death, and dogfight training is among the most intense phases of learning how to fly the FA-18.
So dogfighting is one of the most intense phases. How does a student pilot get to that phase? Well, basically, you go to the recruiting officer and you say, I want to be a pilot in the military, whether it's the United States Air Force or Navy, Canadian military, where I came from, or the British Royal Air Force, and you want to be an aviator. Well, you go through a whole battery of tests, aptitude tests, medical tests. Obviously, one of the most important things is have very good eyesight, but also be very healthy. Once you've gone through that initial selection, you might be selected to be officer training. And now you go to boot camp. That's where you basically learn how to clean a rifle, polish your shoes, learn how to do some public speaking like I'm doing with you today. And then eventually you might pass the officer training course, and then you're ready to continue on to your pilot training. As you go through the pilot selection training, just like Mark was talking about NFL sports, it's just like a sports player. Basically, at any point at the time of your training, you could be washed out, and it's very competitive. So by the time someone gets selected into the fighter program, they've already gone through so many hoops that they're extremely competitive. And that's why my friend had that expression about being so competitive that they just did not want to fail that trip. They were very aggressive. So let's tell you this story, and this time you're going to be in the cockpit. It's your choice. This is one of the most advanced parts of the training. So initially they learn how to fly the aircraft, take off and land, fly at night, fly in cloud. Then they would learn low-level navigation, and then they would learn how to drop bombs on the ground, and also maybe air-to-air refueling and other phases. But eventually they learn air intercept, and then this dogfighting phase. It's one of the most advanced phases, and when they get to this final spot, they're going to actually, before they go into a multi-bogey environment, they're going to fight 1v1 against another student. So for you folks today, you have a choice. You can either be in the front seat as the student flying the aircraft, or in the back seat, not as a passenger, but as an instructor. So if you're in the back seat, this is what you would see. You could see over the head of the ejection seat from the front seater. That's the student up there flying, and of course the other aircraft beside him as well. They're going to set up for what we call the 1v1 split for a neutral setup. The idea is that they're going to come at each other 180 degrees apart so that neither aircraft has a positional advantage. When they cross, the fight starts, and now they will maneuver to try and get behind one another. They have to miss each other by 1,000 feet. Imagine a bubble around each aircraft, an invisible globe, a clear bubble that's 1,000 feet all the way around. You can't get any closer than that. They're going to be pulling towards each other with a lot of G-force, and so that they have to hold their tummy muscles, and they're going to not be enough separation to really use their radar. Why do I say they can't use their radar that well? If you imagine the radar, it's sweeping back and forth, but it's sort of like looking through a straw. It's very narrow beam. When you're really close, it's really hard to find someone, so this is a visual dogfighting training scenario. They won't be using their radar very much at all. So this is what it looks like. They're out in the area, they're about 1.5 miles apart. They split. They call it split now. They make sure their weapons are safe. They make sure they've done all their cockpit checks, they're in a good area, and they start getting smaller and smaller. They can barely see each other. When they can finally not barely see each other anymore, one of them will call reverse, and both aircraft will start banking towards one another. And just like that earlier image, when you turn sideways, you can see the other aircraft quite well. You'll call across. Tally 1. The other guy will respond, tally 2. That means they both see each other, fights on. And now they both start pulling really hard G-forces. If you're the pilot in the front, you know it's coming. It's like when you're aggressively driving a car, it's not too bad. You know when you're going to hammer the brakes or turn the steering wheel. But if you're the passenger or the instructor, you've got to prepare because you don't know when he's going to load up that G-force. They're going to start coming towards each other, and they're going to roll out and they're going to come at each other about 4 to 5 miles apart. They're closing at over 2,000 feet per second. Now, what does that mean? 2,000 feet per second. Well, I want to help you with that. And I use a visual aid here for this, and I use this thing called a toothpick. Now, imagine if you're holding a toothpick out at arm's length, and you're pointing the shaft of the toothpick at your eye. At exactly that size of the aircraft that's coming towards you, the enemy aircraft is coming towards you, and he's going to cross it within 5 seconds. Okay, so at 5 seconds before the crossover, he's coming at you so fast that he's only that tiny little toothpick. Now, I want you to do me a favor. Can you do me a favor and hold one of your arms out, palms down like this? Everyone? Super. Take a look now. You guys are very steady fighter pilots. Now, hang on there, and I want you to look at your baby fingernail. The top of your baby fingernail, because that's the size of the enemy aircraft as it's approaching you through the windscreen at 1 second prior to the pass. And then finally, if your hand is still out there, make a fist. And the size of your fist is the size of the enemy aircraft as it's coming towards you at 1/10 of a second prior to the pass. Okay, you can lower your hands. So now you can appreciate that you don't have a lot of time. Well, this is a true story that happened to me. I was in the back seat. I'm now instructing, and this is the 1v1 setup. We did exactly what we just described. We pulled apart. I'm in the back. I'm watching my student. He has to say, tally 1, tally 2. But if he loses visual, he has a rule he has to say. Lost tally. That means I don't see the enemy. The other pilot has to respond immediately with one of two things. If he says lost tally, he has to really say knock it off, because it means both pilots can't see each other. They've lost sight, and now they both would turn away from their last known position. They might turn on their back and pull down. They're just trying to get away from each other temporarily. However, if the other pilot still sees the person who calls lost tally, well, he's in a big advantage, isn't he? He's going to say continue. Now, that's terrible things to hear, because that means lose sight, lose fight. So now, one of you are blind and the other person can see, so the fight can continue. On this given day, I'm in the back seat. My student comes around the corner. I'm tensing my tummy muscles so they can keep the blood working in my vision. But as the aircraft comes down, and we can't see this pointer thing, which is fine, just imagine that the enemy aircraft, the size of a toothpick, is coming through that canopy bow at the top. And when it comes through the bottom of it, I've lost sight. I'm an instructor, but I say to my student, I can't see him. Do you see him? I can't see him. Do you see him? Do you see him? You didn't see him. Were we scared? Yeah, I was pretty scared. Did we miss by 1,000 feet? No. Did we miss by 500 feet? No. We actually carried a thing called a telemetry sensor on board the aircraft. Some of them were in the fuselage and some were on the wingtip. But these sensors gave us telemetry, actually like a perfect, accurate GPS. Something like when you lose your iPhone, you can find it. When we came down, we had a theater, not as big as this and not as glamorous, but we had a big theater that we could debrief and had a big screen, and we could watch the entire fight simulated, put back on an old-fashioned computer screen, but it showed our altitude, our airspeed, our closing velocity, all the data points we needed, as well as if there was a simulated missile launching. It was very good for debriefing our mission. We watched that film, and at the crossover, we missed by 26 feet. Yeah. So, I'm really glad to be here today. Thanks very much. So now, we're going to continue on, and we're going to talk a little bit more of dogfighting and training. But in order to do that, let me just give you a little bit of a background and the journey I got on. There's 4 points here. Pilots love maps. This is a map of Canada, if you don't recognize it. On the left side is Comox Valley. That's where we presently live. It's where I retired. A lot of Canadian military people love to retire out there because it's the mildest place in Canada. The opposite coast is Goose Bay, Labrador. That's where I was born. There's a military base there. There's a lot of United States Air Force and European allies that station up there in Goose Bay. It's a military base as well. But the primary fighter bases are Cold Lake, Alberta, in the middle there, and Bagotville, Quebec. And I've been in position on both of those places as well. So let's go back to Comox Valley on the west coast. This is actually the view of our house out of our balcony right now. And we look at a farmer's field, and that's actually a glacier. It's called the Comox Glacier. Anybody been on Alaska cruise? have gone right by our house. We lived right up Vancouver Island, it's just about halfway between the top and the bottom of Vancouver Island. So when you step out of Vancouver and you're heading up to Alaska, then you're going by our place there, and you might even see that glacier. In order to understand my background, I guess it's good to know a little bit about my parents, especially my dad. My dad was a military Air Force officer. He started as a technician. He wasn't a pilot, but he loved flying. He loved every part of aviation. In fact, we used to joke he had hydraulic fluid in his veins. Here's a picture of them when they were first married. And I was born in Goose Bay, Labrador on the East Coast, as I mentioned. And I was born in January there. And to give you an idea how cold it was minus 56 degrees when I was born. And I don't know if that's Fahrenheit or centigrade. All I know is that's pretty darn cold, right? And I have a brother who's 13 years older than I am, and he was actually shoveling out the private married quarters from our front door when I was born. And here's a picture of him. So way in the back there, that's the type of snow that they got up there as well. So pretty crazy weather there, and you can see why I probably wanted to choose the West Coast instead to retire. As a kid, I just loved working with my hands. I loved building things. I loved things that went fast. And I loved to actually learn and teach. So I built this little speedboat as a kid. I was really into dirt bikes and riding things, which I think is helpful for eye-hand coordination and time and movement. But eventually, I wanted to be a pilot. So in order for me to do that, I was too young. I was 17. I joined the Air Force Reserve as a technician. And this is a picture of me starting up this old single otter in Winnipeg. And I ended up learning a lot about the military by being a reserve technician and working on aircraft as a crewman. And that's where I ended up dating the boss's daughter, a warrant officer, and she became my wife. So that was pretty handy. Eventually, I was accepted into pilot training, and I went to through the different selections as we talk about. And this was the aircraft that I got my wings on, and it's called the Tudor. And anyone who's seen the Snowbirds formation team? Yeah, so a lot of you have seen the Snowbirds. Some of you are probably Canadians, but even the Snowbirds have done a lot of displays in the States as well. They're like the Blue Angels and the Thunderbirds, and they still fly this aircraft even today. Well, I had to study pretty hard. I was not a natural student, especially in high school. I just loved girls and cars and stuff, and I didn't really study too much, but I knew that I really wanted to do well on this. And it was hard to study in those days in the barracks, so what I would do is I'd go in the laundry room, and I'd sit on the dryer, and study. And then eventually a couple other friends who didn't want to listen to Led Zeppelin in the hallway or play foosball or soccer in the barracks, they started joining me, and we would sit on these washing machines and dryers in the laundry room in the barracks and ask each other superstar questions. And that was pretty handy because, as it turned out, I was able to graduate and get my wings. And it was a real privilege to have my dad pin my wings on here. So that was a real neat treat. I did well enough that I was selected to go on to fighters. And this is the fighter lead-in training we used. It was called the F5. It's a Canadair product. It was made by Northrop originally, but it was built under a nice license in Montreal. And so there we are shooting rockets and learned a lot. After I graduated from the basic fighter training school, I could have stayed on the F5 or could have flown the 104 Starfighter, which was part of NATO over in Germany. This is the aircraft that you may have heard the nickname the Widowmaker. It was a Mach 2 aircraft. I had a ride in one. I've never got to fly it operationally. I was assigned to fly in the Cold War under NORAD, North American Air Defense, on the West Coast in Comox on this aircraft, the F-101 Voodoo. Incredible piece of equipment. I could tell you all about this airplane, for example, that it's 80 feet long. The radar has got so much power it would kill a rabbit at 50 paces, so you had to make sure it wasn't running on the ground with a ground crew in front of you. I could also tell you that it had 32,000 pounds of thrust, but I think the best thing to appreciate is how fast it accelerated. This thing was designed in 1948, first flew in 52. Here's the deal. It would go from brake release up to cruising altitude a little bit faster than an airliner. Most of you have been in an airliner, I'm sure. How long from brake release up to 35,000 feet? For most of you, you'd appreciate it's about 20 minutes, right? It's about a minute and a half, 2 minutes on the runway as you're climbing up, cleaning up the gear and the flaps. You start climbing up to altitude, about 35,000 feet. Now you can actually turn off the seatbelt sign. The service comes out, you know, where they have the carvery roast, right? That's what we eat. or maybe it was the pretzels, one at a time. Anyway, that's when it takes 20 minutes for an airliner to get up there. The old F-101 Voodoo, from brake release to 35,000 feet, 90 seconds. Pretty crazy. Its afterburner fuel line was the size of a fire hose, and when you put it in afterburner, you feel this big kick in your back, two of them, because there was two engines. Bam, bam, and then this thing would roll down the runway so quickly, and it would accelerate so quickly that if your head was against the headrest, it was all you could do to get it forward afterwards. That's the feeling of acceleration. It was just like a drag car, and it would go way up. Now, this little thing is just to remind me, this PowerPoint trick, is that it was also very unstable to fly. So if you got out of control with the aircraft, especially either roll coupling or flew too slow, the aircraft would do this thing called a pitch up. What it was is the air would go over the top of the wing, and instead of slowing down like most aircraft, they call it an aerodynamic stall. If it goes too slow, the wings don't work anymore, and the nose just kind of flutters and the nose drops. This thing didn't do that. What it does is you get too slow, the air goes over the top, hits the tail, and pushes the aircraft backwards into a flip. So it basically tumbles out of control, and usually the only way you can come down is to pull the drag chute, pull the afterburner out, pull the drag chute, and if you're really lucky, you'll get the pointy end pointing down, and you can maybe recover, or you have to eject. It was a pretty tricky airplane to fly. We held QRA, a quick reaction alert, is sort of like being a firefighter. Has anyone here have any friends or relatives who are firefighters in the fire department? A few of you, yes. So you appreciate, obviously, and first of all, I want to take this moment to acknowledge all of those people that are very brave in our military and in service departments like the police and the fire department that put themselves in harm's way so that we can have a safer life. Can we have a round of applause for these folks? I mean, it really is something. We really are very, very fortunate. As you can appreciate, a fire job involves a lot of training, a lot of courage, but many, many hours of boredom and quietness, right? I mean, they're waxing and cleaning the fire trucks, they're getting ready, maybe they're studying, but they're working out, playing a little ping pong. But when the alarm goes off, they've got to go. And the QRA that I was involved with was very much the same. In the Cold War, we had 2 armed aircraft ready to scramble within 5-minute notice. We had to be airborne within 5 minutes. So this is what it would look like. The aircraft would be parked in one of these 2 hangars, and in the center section is where we lived. So just like a fire hall would be, you know, they had a gym at the back, they had a sort of a lounge where there was a TV and you could play cards, there was a cafeteria area, and then there was an ops desk, and then of course our sleeping quarters for both the ground crew and the air crew. I want to share with you a kind of a funny story. It was very embarrassing, but those are the most fun to tell you about. And it involved me on a night in the queue. I'm sleeping in the back. So on the other side, there are the ground crew. There's 6 or 8 of them, and there were 4 air crew, 2 pilots and 2 navigators, or weapon systems operators, WISOs. And so we're in the back of that section back there, and it's 5 in the morning, and my bladder is getting full. So I go, okay, I gotta go up. I get out of my bed. I'm in my underwear, and I wander down the hall, and past the canteen, and off the right there's the men's room, and I go in. And I decide for whatever reason I'm going to sit in the stall. So I leave my room, I leave all my flying gear back there, of course, and I sit in the stall, and I'm noticing there's graffiti on the side of the stall. And I'm kind of reading it a little bit, and I notice finally somebody has taken a pen and drawn a circle with another dot in the center, and it says panic button. It's 5:30 in the morning. What could be wrong with this? I reach out, and I touch the pencil panic button. At the very second I touch it, the klaxon horn goes off. Like literally, that second it went off, and I thought, it can't be. There's no way. It's impossible, right? I mean, if it was TikTok or something, it was taking a video. In fact, I really did think somebody had a video camera. I kind of looking over my shoulder. I couldn't figure this out, and then it just took me, but it felt like an eternity, but it was probably 2 seconds before I realized this is the real horn. This is the scramble horn. It never went off on the West Coast. It meant that we had to identify an unknown airliner maybe coming in before air traffic control could identify it, or it could actually be the real thing, a threat from somewhere on the West Coast coming in towards land of Canada and the United States. So I'm now in a panic, and I jump up, and I run down the hallway, and by this time, I've met with all the ground crew, and they've got their toolkits swinging from their hips, and I'm dodging and ducking because I'm sitting there in my skivvies trying to get back to where my flying suit was. I get by all the ground crew, and then there's the 3 air crew. The other pilot, they're giving me very dirty looks because I'm not ready, and they're all in their flying gear. I have to get by them and get dressed. As I finish getting dressed, I run out, and as you come out to the hangar, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to see the aircraft parked in front of you, but there's a door there, and you look right to your left, because up on the high near the ceiling is like a traffic light, red, yellow, green. Now, of course, 90% of the time it's red. It means it was a false scramble. They finally found out who it was. Don't worry, you can shut down. So I'm praying it's red. If it's yellow, you've got to jump into the cockpit. You've got to put on your helmet, establish communications. You don't start the engines, but you're on standby, ready to go. And then the tower will tell you whether or not you have to go. It was green. So, of course, the adrenaline shoots up even more. I'm running up the ladder. It's my navigator staring at me. I signal to the ground crew with 2 fingers like this, meaning I'm going to start both engines at once. I reach in and I flick both starter switches. They have 2 starter ready hooked up to the aircraft. And I jump in the cockpit, and before I even strap in, I throw the helmet on so I can hear. And sure enough, I can hear the other pilot on the other side of the other hangar saying to the tower, "Confirm this is a live scramble." In other words, are we just practicing? Is this like a training thing, or is this the real thing? And they said it was a live scramble. Why did he even ask that question? Is because when the doors opened, this is what we saw. The weather was abysmal. The sun had just basically had barely arrived at the horizon, but there was snow on the ground, there was ice, and the visibility was very poor. So there's no way we would have ever gone flying if it was a training mission. But that green light was on. They said it was a live scramble. The adrenaline is up. I'm now getting ready to taxi out as I'm continuing to strap in. He's already ahead of me. We normally don't take off in close formation for an intercept like that. What we want to do is take off in trail so that the lead aircraft is about 3 miles ahead. So that way, when you do the intercept, the lead is the first one to identify the unknown potential enemy aircraft. And that way, if it's hostile, the second aircraft is in a position to shoot. Does that make sense? Yeah. So this time, I'm a little bit behind because this guy's already taken off. I'm maybe 15, 20 seconds behind. And I roll out on the runway, and I put the power up. And as I put the power up, the aircraft doesn't take off till 175 knots. That's almost about 190 miles an hour. And I'm getting to about 100 miles an hour, and at that speed, I see this. Instant whiteout. Now, have you ever done that in a car? You've been driving along, all of a sudden you hit a bucket of fog. It's very frightening, isn't it? Because you don't know whether to turn left or right. You'd have to slow down. So I was the same thing. I was too slow to fly, and I was too fast to stop. I could have pulled the drag chute to stop, but it doesn't work below 100 knots, and I would have been out of the game because you have to repack it normally. So I decided there's no way I could continue to fly, so I pulled the throttle back and I put the brakes on and I tried to stay on the runway. Fortunately, when I came to a stop, I looked down and this is what I saw. I was very fortunate. I was still on the runway. That was my lead's path through the snow on the runway. So all I had to do was circle back to the button of the runway and try again. At this time, I realized what had happened was when he went into afterburner, he created that ice fog. So now I just was prepared for that, and it cleared away enough, and I got airborne. I get airborne, I'm climbing out. I hear him switch over to the air weapons controller. So we've gone from tower to terminal, that's a civilian controllers, over to a military controller in McChord Air Force Base, just outside of Seattle. And their name was Topsoil, and they called in and identified, and we're now going out on this live scramble. So the adrenaline is up, I'm ready, I've got the aircraft armed to see what's going to happen. The controller says, number 2, turn right 120 degrees. My lead, fortunately, steps in and says, negative, we are tied. That means the number 2, me, is tied with radar contact locked onto my lead so that we could stay together. And the topsoil guy says, no, negative, number 2, you turn right 120 degrees. Finally, the lead says, confirm this is a live scramble. They said, no, it's a training exercise. Yeah, so he immediately calls, knock it off, we're RTB, return to base. Well, we start going back to the base and we say, what is our alternate? Because we knew the weather was terrible there. And they said, you have none. The entire West Coast was right down in weather. So we were in real trouble because we had a lot of fuel, but we didn't have anywhere to go. So we had a choice. We either try to wait and maybe something would open up, or we could try and get into Comox again before the weather got even worse and the snow got thicker. Well, we decided to try to get back in, which meant that we would have to break minimums. In other words, there's a minimum altitude you're allowed to fly down to before you have to go around, and we were going to have to bust that. If it didn't work, we were going to overshoot and then take a vector out onto the strait and maybe look for a Celebrity cruise ship to eject nearby so they could come and pick us up. So fortunately, it worked out. We did get down and we did land the aircraft and we were safe. But there was a huge investigation about why this live thing is. So for you folks, there's always a lesson to be learned. What's the lesson that I learned from that? Don't pee. That's pretty good. Don't push the button, right? Don't push a panic button, even if it's a pencil. That's right. Okay, so now we're getting excited because we're going to think about getting the F-18. Canada hasn't had a new fighter in a long time. They called it the NFA, the New Fighter Aircraft. They hadn't even decided whether it was going to be the F-15, the F-16. They were looking at the Panavia Tornado. And finally, in the short list, it was between the F-18 and the F-16. We were all excited and we were all curious who was going to be the first ones to fly this aircraft, because I had no idea. I was a pretty young pilot at the time, and I thought, there's no way, it's going to be eons before I'll ever even get to see this aircraft, because everybody's going to be tripping over each other to try and get to fly it. Well, as it turns out, kind of success leaves clues, and I just want to tell you just a few things, because I often tell young pilots about this as an expression of how sometimes luck is just preparation meeting opportunity. Have you heard of that expression? Well, it's one I really love because, and the other thing I used to use is a bit of a metaphor of always work on your backhand. Any pickleball players, tennis players, racket sports? A lot of you, great. Well, as you know, some people are a little stronger with their forehand than their backhand. So the idea there is to maybe work on your weakness. And for me, I love looking outside. I love flying visually. I loved air combat. I was a pretty good fighter pilot that way, but I was not that good at instrument flying. I didn't like flying in cloud, had to stare at those instruments all the time, but I realized I needed to work on that. That was my backhand, and I got very skilled at doing that to the point where they said, as a young lieutenant, I could actually become a instrument check pilot. So they sent me to instrument check pilot school so I could do check rides on other pilots. Well, that was very handy. I had no idea what the benefit of that was, but what it meant was that because I had that qualification, I could now become a fighter instructor over in Bagotville on the old Voodoo. Because you had to either be a Top Gun graduate, an air weapons instructor course graduate, or an instrument check pilot to qualify. Well, I had the first qualification that I mentioned, the ICP, so I got to teach on this aircraft. And it was really fun to teach. It was neat because I was teaching the pilots how to fly the airplane, but I also had to learn the backseater's job, the navigator's job, because they would just get to the solo point and then eventually I'd have to learn the radar stuff and how they did it. Well, eventually I was selected to be one of the initial cadre to get this new F-18. And here's the list of the guys. I'm on the bottom right. I was the youngest. I was 26 years old. And I had no idea how lucky I was. I really didn't. I just assumed I was just cocky. And I thought, yeah, of course I'm going to get to fly this amazing aircraft. And when we got the aircraft, it had the new car smell. It was still had plastic on the seats. I mean, it was amazing. And we got trained by McDonnell Douglas test pilots. These are the ones who qualified us for it. But we were green as grass. And so we had to learn a lot. And there was a lot of instrumentation here that we had to look through, including this heads-up display, which is pretty common now, but in the time it was really state-of-the-art. I learned also, because I had gone from being an operational pilot to an instructor, and then back had to learn to fly the F-5 again, that I'd lost my ability to learn. And so when I got on the F-18, I realized that I had to treat the students differently. If they were young pipeliners, as we call them, initial pilots, you could just tell them to jump, they'd say how high, and they could do it with their eyes closed. Whereas the more seasoned guys, you had to kind of cajole them. You'd say, listen, I know that's how you did it back in your airplane, but this is a new aircraft, etc., etc. So I really worked on trying to be a little bit better instructor than maybe Charlie Brown's teacher. So to bring in the airplane was quite a challenge. One of the things I wanted to share with you is the simulator was quite advanced. In normal simulators, you know, the airliner simulators, they're on hydraulic jacks and they can move around. What they did was they realized that a fighter plane, you can't make a hydraulic jack have you fly upside down realistically. So what they did is they had this thing that looked like a giant planetarium. You ever been to a planetarium? It's beautiful, isn't it? I mean, you sit back and you look up at the sky, it's like this globe of light all around you. Well, imagine that with a second planetarium parked underneath it. So that you go out on a gangplank, and you walk out on the gangplank, and you get into this cockpit, and all around you, above like a planetarium, and below you, is the sky and the earth. And the aircraft sits still in the center of this globe, and you've got lights all around you of the sky and the horizon. So when you bank the aircraft, the horizon goes like this, but you're still standing right up. It used to fool the pilots very well, because what they would do is they would tighten your seatbelt straps if you did negative G. If you rolled, one of your bum cheeks would get a little air pressure in it to kind of feel that momentum. If you hit the power for acceleration, the back the seat would fill up with air. And again, it didn't take long before you were convinced. In fact, it was so good at convincing you, the flight surgeons said that we were not allowed to drive or ride a bicycle for 24 hours after a simulator session. The reason for that was the pilot's inner ear would get all messed up because you weren't moving, but you thought you were. And so there were guys that literally would walk down the hall and then turn and walk straight into a wall. Now, I know some of you are on the drink package, and maybe you've seen this in the hallways, but needless to say, you don't want to have that happen to you. And to prove that this happened to me, I didn't hit the wall, but I was doing some maintenance test pilot work, both on the aircraft and in the simulator, and the simulator was having some problems. So I went in to help the technicians, and I'm strapped in like this gentleman, and I'm flying the aircraft in some maneuvers. And I get the aircraft up into a 70-degree climb. So I'm like this, visually. So the horizon's down below me like this, and I'm looking at the sky, and it freezes. The simulator freezes. And I wait, and then I hear this, sorry, sir, it looks like the simulator's broken, we're gonna shut her down. I said, okay. So they shut down the simulator, and these handrails come up that are out of sight normally, and the technician comes walking out on the platform to help me unstrap and leave the cockpit. Well, as he's walking out towards me, I observe in my mind's eye, he's walking up a 70-degree ramp. And I'm looking at him very strangely, and he doesn't know what I'm looking at yet. And I unstrap, and honest to goodness, what I did is I unstrapped, I put my hand on that bow there, because there's no glass in front of it, so I just hand onto that crossbow there, and I put my feet on the seat like this, trying to get out. And he starts laughing at me, because the aircraft in my mind was still like this, so why was I thinking I could get out without standing on the back of the seat? Anyway, so that's one of the crazy things that happened with this. We did a lot of different training. The aircraft was a multi-role aircraft, so we did air-to-ground, air-to-air, and air-to-air refueling, which is pretty odd to try and run into something when you spend your whole career trying to avoid touching things in the sky, but it was quite a challenge to do that. We're going to kind of run out of time, so I won't have time to run through all the glitches and problems that we had, and I do want to tell you a little bit about why we no longer do these 1v1 neutrals and how we solved that problem. But before we do, I thought I could open it up for questions for you. So if we could get the house lights up a little bit, please, just so I can see. Anyone have a question? Yes, sir. Yeah. Personally, during the Cold War on the West Coast, it was really quite quiet. We got very close to airliners, and of course we did a lot of exercises, intercepting B-52s, B-57s, a lot of Allied aircraft that would come in. On the East Coast, it was more common, because the Russian Bears would come down the East Coast towards Cuba, and they would take a dirty dart right towards either Newfoundland or Halifax, or down the coast to New York, and all the interceptors would always launch up and intercept them. And sometimes, they'd be showing Playboy magazines to each other and things like that. It was quite silly. It was war games, much like you saw in the very first Top Gun movie. But personally, only my students later were in the Gulf War Desert Storm 1. Yeah, a lot of my students were. Yes, ma'am. Right. So the question is that when we had the close call, and I didn't know where we were, the other aircraft should have said something. What happened there was that the student didn't say anything. He froze. He was the one who was supposed to transmit lost tally. I was only communicating in the cockpit. I was trying to get the student to say, I have him, relax, instructor, or lost tally. And then the other guy would have said continue or knock it off, and they would have both broken away. But what happened was no one said anything. And of course, with that short a time period, we didn't have time to really react. So very good question. Yes, sir. Yes. Wow, that's a really good question. During my dogfoot training, are you allowed to pull out your bag of dirty tricks and pull out whatever you do? Yes, and we'll get into that in the Top Gun movie, because one of the things that's really interesting is the learning curve is very steep to become either basically a victim or a victor. I mean, it's life and death. And so when you first learn, you are going to get shot down. You are going to lose. And so the instructors had such an advantage because of their experience. Even though it was a new aircraft for us, we were the McDonnell Douglas test pilots. All they did was teach us how to take off and land. We had to actually develop the tactics and learn to fight ourselves. But we had a lot of experience prior to that. So what happens is we would limit the instructors. So the instructors would never use afterburner, for example, or we would be limited to guns only, so that the students would have an advantage. And quite often we'd set up the students where they had a positional advantage before they start, and we'd see how long it was before the situation would be reversed. So yes, the skills that you learn, like you said, are dirty tricks, but it's to do with your reaction and situation awareness that really makes a difference. Thanks for the question. Just saying, anyone else, anyone up top that I haven't been able to answer? Yes, over here. Okay, so the question was, is there's a difference between training young pilots and old seasoned ones. What's the difference between women and men training? Yeah, okay, well, when I was going through pilot training, there was only one or two women that had trained. None of them at that time had gone on to fighters. After I was just about leaving the program, we started getting our very first women into the fighter training program. Generally, from sort of a biological point of view, there's no difference. They can be just as good, very, very effective. The challenge that we had is that anytime you have a minority, and we had a huge minority issue with only so many women that would apply, and so many women would qualify for the physiological things. In other words, height and weight requirements to fit in the ejection seat. So they had to be a minimum, for example, 5'6" and 145 pounds or something like that. They started to lower that, as much as they could. But that limited, and then there weren't that many applicants. And then when they did get those applicants, a lot of them didn't want to go into the fighter business, but those who did, some of them did very well and some of them did very poorly because there was such a small cadre of them initially. But what we did find over time, that the ones that were there, that wanted it and had the aptitude, were just as good. There's no doubt. Yeah. So I hope that answers your question. Someone else up the top, I thought. Oh yes, okay. Right. Yes. You're talking about the accident in Italy where a fighter plane flew through and cut a gondola cable and killed many people. Very sad. We've had that situation in Canada and the United States with low-level aircraft, even helicopters that have hit cables. Some of the cables are for logging wires or communication wires, so it's very easy to get lost there. There are all sorts of maps and NOTAMs regarding where you're not supposed to fly. And so the individual involved with that, I don't know the full details, but there was enough information to show him that he should not have been in that area. So it was just a huge tragic mistake for sure. Yes? One more question? Yes, at the very back. Canada have B-1 bombers? No, they don't. Yeah. Yes. The B-58 Hustler nuclear bombers? Well, the B-1, the B-2, and of course, the B-52s are right now are even back in service. So, unfortunately, we've run out of time. I don't want to hold you up because you don't want to get in the way of the buffet. So, let's talk about that close call. What we realized is that we couldn't have this happen, and it happened more than once. And so, and I have seen a midair and a maple flag exercise once, and it was really frightening. I mean, basically you vaporize. When the aircraft hit each other at that speed, everything just turns to particles. So what we ended up doing is the only way we could solve this problem was to have the 1v1 neutral never against two students. It was always a student with an instructor fighting him. So it meant that one student would go up with two instructors and two airplanes. So the student was under supervision of an instructor, but at least the other person that was flying had enough situation awareness so that they could go through that. It was very expensive to operate like that, but on the other hand, the pilot, who was the instructor in the foreground here in the single seat, he would get to fly against two sets of students because he didn't get to use afterburner. So they would run out of fuel very quickly, and then they'd bring in another guy. So that was helpful. So that's how we basically solved it. But to bring that aircraft in like that was a real challenge. So my question is, you've now been in the cockpit, and it's time for me to give you your seat back. And so make sure you put your seat pin in, because you don't want this thing to go off unexpectedly. And what I want you to do is tell your friends at supper that you know a little bit about a toothpick, that if you hold it at arm's length, you have 5 seconds. See you next C-Day. Thank you.
turn it off now?
Yeah.